10 years or less, please. Look at this. All those hams for 15 years or less. Yes. Please sit down. Hey, no takers for 15 years. All right. All those that have been hams for 20 years or less. Here they go. Now, look at this. Look what we've got. All those that have been hams for 25 years or less. Please sit down. No takers again? Maybe one? Okay. Now, this is getting serious. All those that have been hams for 30 years or less, please sit down. Look at that. Look at it. Great. People you didn't even realize. Okay, all those that have been hams for 35 years or less, please sit down. I'm not saying I said that. Okay, all those that have been hams for 40 years or less, please sit down. That hurts too. All right. Look who's left. Did you know this? All those have been hams for 45 years or less.
Or less?
Or less.
Well, sit down. Give me no more.
No, 45 years or less.
No, or more.
No.
Or more. Or less, we all sit down.
No.
Or less means 5 years.
You're still standing. All right. Look who we are. All those that have been hams for 50 years or less. Please sit down.
How about silent
Look at that. All those that have been hams for 55 years or less. Period of time. Is anyone taking notes? All those that have been hams for 60 years or less. Please down. We lost Walt, and we lost Red.
58, I got 58.
There you go. What did I say?
60.
60? Oh, man. All those that have been hams for 65 years or less. Take a look out here. Oh, we lost Tom, we lost Austin. Oh, man. We got 4. Did I say 65?
That's what you said.
Have any been hams for 70 years or less? What was that, 70?
Yeah.
71 years. 72 years.
Better hurry up, these guys are getting tired.
73 years. 74 years or less. They refused. 75 years or less. I'm sorry I missed your name when you stood up earlier. Okay, Aram W63Y has been a ham for how long?
76, 1920. And the funny thing is, my station license, which I still have, see, we had 2 licenses. Operator's license and station license is dated March 25th, which was my birthday.
All right. That was enjoyable.
Are you recording?
Go ahead.
At this time, I'd like to call upon our Executive Vice President, Marvin Johnston, AE6HTS, who's going to tell us a little bit about our program tonight. Marvin?
is they're going to share some of their experiences about what it was like back in the early days of ham radio. And I'm sorry, I have to refer to my paper because I don't remember call signs. And what we have is, of course, you remember Aram, he's our oldest ham, and his call sign is W6JY. And we have Merle, Parten, and K6DC. And I don't remember, how long have you been a ham for?
67 years.
67 years. And we have Leonard, who's W6THN. Sounds like the insulation on some wire there. And how long have you been a ham for?
58.
58 years. Wow.
I think Merle is the former president of SMART.
Ah, what year were you president?
It's in the 50s. It followed Tompkins. Walker Tompkins. That was next after.
Outstanding. That's great.
And W6WC was the station called.
Super. Thank you for bringing that up. I wasn't aware of that. And so what I'd like to do is invite them to join us for a kind of a roundtable discussion, if you will, and where they'll reminisce and talk about some of the early experiences. So, Art,
We're up on the stage. We'll put the mic.
What we'd like to start out, but I'd like to know what we've done in our youth. I don't think they come up, we did for old men.
No. Well, I'll tell you something. The last thing that Phil down here said, Aram, don't stretch the truth. But I'm going to tell you something which is unbelievable. The day I was born, that was back in 1903, in March, my father bought me some shares in the Marconi Wireless Company of America on the day I was born. I wish I had that certificate, but I don't. But the trouble is, if you bought the Canadian company, that didn't go broke. The company bought mine and it went broke. So I got started pretty early, if you want to know the truth of the matter.
Right.
Now,
How about some ham radio experiences?
well, first of all, I'll tell you, if you want to hear how I got started, everybody in this room, somebody, first told you about ham radio. It might have been in school, it might have been in the Boy Scouts, or somebody, or your father, or uncle, or brother. Well, the way mine happened was back in 1913. I was 10 years old, and I was in the 4th grade. Now, I may have told you this before, so those that haven't heard it can listen. Those that heard it, never mind. But there was a young fellow by the name of Arthur Sunderland. You know, his clothes didn't fit. I don't think he even knew what a barber shop was. But he said one day, he said, Aram, would you like to see my wireless set? I said, what's that? Well, he said, come over and I'll show it to you. So we got our trusty steeds, our bicycles, and we went down way the other side of town here at DeLacy. That's where the Parsons Company, now it's cleaned it all up. It's a wonderful part of town. But at that time, it certainly wasn't. Well, anyhow, his wireless shack was in the outhouse. That's before, finally, but Pasadena finally got indoor plumbing, so it was for Red, so that was where he was. So he started up his Pashgiam. But the fellow that bought it was Clarence Siemens, and that became his life work. He became an operator at KFI for over 25 years. Then when Christmas came, he wrote a letter to Santa Claus, and you should have seen the stuff he got. Oh boy, that was wonderful. Well, anyhow, that's the way I got started. Who started you?
Well, Billy cooking on Booze and Powder, going to high school, and his uncle was a ham. And he got Billy interested in through Bill, I got interested. And Bill and I owned a couple of Model T4s, we were 15 or 16. And we had built some Christmas sets with a wire wrapped on an oatmeal box. I don't know how many times it was, it was scattered. We had a slider on it, and one of those little delayed Christmas. And one day when we started up the Ford, Billy was fooling out with the set, and we could hear the stunt car of the Ford go.
Right.
And he got the idea, he said, say, maybe we could build a spark transmitter and talk back and forth. I live about 3 blocks away from him. So we decided one Saturday morning we're going to do it. And I took the Ford car down, and we had a bell transformer, and we keyed the primary about 10. They got killed. Anyhow, Bill was 2 blocks away at the Christmas set. And so I was singing along there, practicing work very slowly. And doing my best and sweating it out. I guess I sat for about 10 or 15 minutes. Well, it so happened that a fellow ham, I wasn't a fellow, I was actually a ham, lived about 4 or 5 blocks from me. And I used to go up there all the time to nose around. He had the biggest transmitter in town. He had 500 watts. Well, that was the greatest thing. And his name was Jack McCullough, and he turned out to be one of the principals of Itel McCullough. So I went up to see him later, and he said, "See, I hear you guys are practicing your code." And I said, "How do you know?" Well, I heard it on my broadcast set. We got up early in the morning so nobody would listen, but he got to listen to the morning news. So that turned it off right then. Anyhow, later on I went to see Jack McCullough, and I got a job at IMAX. And of course I worked for them for nearly 20 years. And I got pretty high in the company. But anyhow, that's where I got started in ham radio. When I went to IMAX, everybody that worked for him was a ham. And this was back in 1936. Now eventually I got my hand kicked 2 years later in 1938. And at the time, all the guys that were in the plant, or still factory, whatever you want to call it, were all old timers. I don't think anybody had over a lead call or a letter. And pretty soon they were saying, "Hey, you know, they're all the way down to the hour." And I hear Willis talking in this place, and they said, "When are you going to take your license?" I said, I'm already, I can copy 12, 13 words a minute like that. I went up, took my license, and I came back, and they said, "You passed?" "Yeah, I passed. I did fine." "Well, I guess you're going to get W6RRR." And I said, "Nobody's going to get W6RRR. It's impossible. It can't happen." So all week long, for about 2 weeks, I was whistling. And I thought, oh, geez, if this happens, I'm going to die, you know. I went down to the post office. We had boxes in those days, and I reached in there, and there was the thing from the Communications Commission. And I took it out, and I opened it up, and there was W6RRR. And I didn't tell those guys for a week. Anyhow, that was it. But, of course, prior to that, prior to getting my license, we had a station at the plant, and I bootlegged old Bill Attell's call. He didn't know it. But anyhow, he got to be known as the lousiest operator. He was one of the best, to tell you. Not only his reputation,
How about you, Merle?
Well, I guess I was about 12 years old and built one of these crystal sets with a Galena crystal, and we had one broadcast station in town, and I had an antenna strung around the bedroom on the curtains, and I wasn't getting the station very loud, and I read in Booker Gernsback's magazine that if you use one side of the power line. So I went up the plug with one side, plugged it in, listened to nothing, a bit louder. Switch has got to be off. So turn the switch on, the wire got red hot, brought the curtains on. My dad came in and says, "Don't you ever play with this stuff again." I never have. And a friend of mine and I were trying to get a Boy Scout radio merit band. And we built us a buzzer, and we were practicing. His name was Marshall, and mine was Parten. So he always sat just ahead of me in class. And he'd turn around and talk radio. The teacher was moving across the room. So we devised a system, dot, dash. So we'd send messages back and forth across the room, and we'd transcribe them, and pretty soon we'd memorize the code. So why don't we get a Boy Scout merit badge, 5 words a minute? So we built a buzzer and we started practicing on that. We were over to another friend's house one time that was interested, and he had a ham operator from back east visiting. And he says, "Let me show you something on that." Now, we were struggling to copy 5 words a minute. He started sending in about 15, 20 words a minute, A, B, C, D, E. We recognized it. He said, "This is just another language. It's just a sound. Like if you say house or barn, it's different sounds. So the speed is not the thing that you have to learn it by sound. So that all 3 of us that were there, we had our ham licenses in about another 6 months. We got our code speed up to 10 or 12 words a minute, whatever it was. And so that's where I got my start in ham radio. About this Catlister thing, I was installing a network of radio photo stuff in South America for newspapers. And I was in this newspaper in Lima, Peru, waiting for my schedule to come off. We had a schedule now in New York at 2 p.m. And it was a blind transmission. We'd copy it, and the newspaper would print the pictures in their paper. Well, I was walking along the hallway, and I heard code come in from behind the door. So I listened a minute, and it was news out of New York. So I went inside, and here was the operator with his back to me, the headphones on. And on his workbench, a little table there, he had a crystal set, oatmeal box, Galena crystal, the whole works. Just like I'd built 1,000 years before. So when he got a rest break in a minute, I says, "You speak English?" "No, I don't English." So I said, "Momentito." So I went in my service kit, and I got a 1N34. I came in my excellent Spanish, I says, "Malo, malo, malo. Bueno, bueno." So the next day, the bureau manager came to me and he says, "How much was that thing you gave the operator?" I says, "Oh, I guess 90 cents, something like that." "Oh," he said, "that's too big a part of his salary. He wanted to get one for his brother." So I got my ham license at age 17, ham license and the commercial telegraph second. And I held the telegraph second and telephone first until just 2 or 3 years ago I let them go because I never used them. So that's my story.
Well, we all have stories.
Look at this. All those hams for 15 years or less. Yes. Please sit down. Hey, no takers for the 15 years. All right. All those that have been hams for 20 years or less. Here they go. Now, look at this. Look what we've got. All those that have been hams for 25 years or less. Please sit down. No takers again? Maybe one? Okay. This is getting serious. All those that have been hams for 30 years or less, please sit down. Look at that. Look at them. Great. People you didn't even realize. Okay, all those that have been hams for 35 years or less, please sit down. I'm not saying I said that. Okay, all those that have been hams for 40 years or less, please sit down. That hurts too. All right. Look who's left. Did you know this? All those have been hams for 45 years or less.
Or less?
Or less.
Well, sit down. Give me no more.
No, 45 years or less.
No, or more.
No.
Or more. Or less, we all sit down.
No.
Or less means 5 years.
You're still standing. All right. All those that have been hams for 50 years or less. Please sit down.
How about silent
All those that have been hams for 55 years or less. Period of time. Is anyone taking notes? All those that have been hams for 60 years or less.
Put me down.
We lost
you,
Walt, and we lost Red.
58, I got 58.
There you go. What did I say?
60.
60? Oh, man. All those that have been hams for 65 years or less. Take a look out here. We lost Tom, we lost Austin. Oh, man. We got 4. Did I say 65?
That's what you said.
Has any been hams for 50 years or less? What was that, 70?
Yeah.
71 years. 72 years.
Better hurry up, these guys are getting tired.
73 years. 74 years or less. They refused. 75 years or less. I'm sorry I missed your name when you stood up earlier. Okay, Aram, W16Y, has been a ham for how long?
76, 1920. And the funny thing is, my station license, which I still have, see, we had 2 licenses. Operator's license and station license is dated March 25th, which was my birthday. What year?
All right, that was enjoyable.
Are you recording?
Go ahead.
At this time, I'd like to call upon our Executive Vice President, Marvin Johnston, KE6HGS, who's going to tell us a little bit about our program tonight. Marvin?
do is they're going to share some of their experiences about what it was like back in the early days of ham radio. And I'm sorry, I have to refer to my paper because I don't remember call signs. And what we have is, of course, you remember Aram, he's our oldest ham, and his call sign is the W6JY. And we have Merle, Parten, and K6DC. And I don't remember, how long have you been a ham for?
67 years.
67 years. And we have Leonard, who's W6THM. Sounds like the insulation on some wire there. And how long have you been a ham for?
58.
58 years.
Wow. I think Merle is the former president of this park. Yes.
Ah, what year were you president?
It's in the 50s. It followed Tompkins.
54,
Walker
55.
Tompkins. That was right after that.
Outstanding. That's great.
And W6WC was the station called.
Super. Thank you for bringing that up. I wasn't aware of that. And so what I'd like to do is invite them to join us for a kind of a roundtable discussion, if you will, and where they'll reminisce and talk about some of the early experiences. So, Art,
We're up on the stage. We'll put the mic. What we'd like to start out, what they'd like to know is what we've done in our youth. I don't think they come up with it for old men.
No. Well, I'll tell you something. The last thing that Phil down here said, Aram, don't stretch the truth. But I'm going to tell you something which is unbelievable. The day I was born, that was back in 1903, in March, my father bought me some shares in the Marconi Wireless Company of America. On the day I was born. I wish I had that certificate, but I don't. But the trouble is, if you bought the Canadian company, that didn't go broke. The company bought mine and it went broke. So I got started pretty early, if you want to know the truth of the matter.
Right.
Now,
How about some ham radio experiences?
well, first of all, I'll tell you, if you want to hear how I got started, now, everybody in this room, somebody, first told you about ham radio. It might have been in school, it might have been in the Boy Scouts, or somebody, or your father, or uncle, or brother. Well, the way mine happened was back in 1913. I was 10 years old, and I was in the 4th grade. Now, I may have told you this before, so those that haven't heard it can listen. Those that heard it, never mind. There was a young fellow by the name of Arthur Sunderland. You know, his clothes didn't fit. I don't think he even knew what a barber shop was. But he said one day, he said, Aram, would you like to see my wireless set? I said, what's that? Well, he said, come over and I'll show it to you. So we got our trusty steeds, our bicycles, and we went down way the other side of town near DeLacy. That's where the Parsons Company, now it's cleaned it all up. It's a wonderful part of town. But at that time, it certainly wasn't. Well, anyhow, his wireless shack was in the outhouse. That's before, finally, but Pasadena finally got indoor plumbing, so it was for Red, so that was where he was. So he started up his Pashgiam. But the fellow that bought it was Clarence Siemens, and that became his life work. He became an operator at KFI for over 25 years. Then when Christmas came, he wrote a letter to Santa Claus, and you should have seen the stuff he got. Oh boy, that was wonderful. Well, anyhow, that's the way I got started. Who started you?
Well, Billy Cook and I, Booz and Powell were going to high school, and his uncle was a ham. And he got Billy interested in, through Bill, I got interested. And Bill and I owned a couple of Model T Fords. We were 15 or 16. And we had built some Christmas sets with a wire wrapped on an oatmeal box. I don't know how many times there was a scab. We had a slider on it and one of those little Delina crystals. And one day when we started up the Ford, Billy was fooling out with the set and he could hear the stunt car from the Ford off. Right. And he got the idea. He said, say, maybe we could build a spark transmitter and walk back and forth. I live about 3 blocks away from that. So we decided one Saturday morning we're going to do it. Right? The Ford called down and we had a bell transformer. And we keyed the primary about 10. They got killed. Anyhow, Bill was 2 blocks away at the Christmas set. And so I was singing along there, practicing work very slowly. And doing my best and sweating it out. I guess I sat for about 10 or 15 minutes. Well, it so happened that a fellow ham, I wasn't even a fellow, I was actually a ham, lived about 4 or 5 blocks from me. And I used to go up there all the time and nose around. He had the biggest transmitter in town. He had 500 watts. Well, that was the greatest thing. And his name was Jack McCullough, and he turned out to be one of the principals of Itel McCullough. So I went up to see him later, and he said, "Say, I hear you guys are practicing your code." And I said, "How do you know?" Well, I heard it on my broadcast set. We got up early in the morning so nobody would listen, but he got to listen to the morning news. So that turned it off right there. Anyhow, later on I went to see Jack McCullough and I got a job at IMAX. And of course I worked with them for nearly 20 years. And I got pretty high in the company. But anyhow, that's where I got started in ham radio. When I went to IMAX, everybody that worked for him was a ham. And this was back in 1936. And eventually I got my hand fixed 2 years later in 1938. And at the time, all the guys that were in the plant, or factory, whatever you want to call it, were all old timers. I don't think anybody had over a lead call or a letter. And pretty soon they were saying, "Hey, you know, they're all the way down to the hour." And I hear Willis talking in the place, and so they said, "When are you going to take your license?" I said, I'm all ready. I can copy 12, 13 words a minute like that. I went up and took my license, and I came back, and they said, "You passed?" "Yeah, I passed. I did fine." "Well, I guess you're going to get W6RRR." I said, "Nobody's going to get W6RRR. It's impossible. It can't happen." So all week long, for about 2 weeks, I was whistling. And I thought, "Oh, geez, if this happens, I'm going to die." You know, I went down to the post office. We had boxes in those days, and I reached in there, and there was the thing from the Communications Commission. And I took it out, and I opened it up, and there was W6RRR. And I didn't tell those guys for a week. Anyhow, that was it. But, of course, prior to that, prior to getting my license, we had a station at the plant, and I bootlegged old Bill Attell's call. He didn't know it. But anyhow, he got to be known as the lousiest operator. He was one of the best, to tell you. That was his reputation.
How about you, Merle?
Well, I guess I was about 12 years old and built one of these crystal sets with Galena crystal, and we had one broadcast station in town, and I had me an antenna strung around the bedroom on the curtains, and I wasn't getting the station very loud, and I read in Booker Gernsback's magazine that if you use one side of the power line. So I hooked up the plug with one side, plugged it in, listened to nothing, a bit louder. Switch has got to be on. So turn the switch on, the wire got red hot, brought the curtains on. My dad came in and says, "Don't you ever play with this stuff again." I never have. And a friend of mine and I were trying to get a Boy Scout radio merit band. And we built us a buzzer, and we were practicing. His name was Marshall, and mine is Parten. So he always sat just ahead of me in class. And he'd turn around and talk radio. The teacher was moving across the room. So we devised a system, dot, dash. So we'd send messages back and forth across the room, and we'd transcribe them, and pretty soon they'd memorize the code. So why don't we get a Boy Scout merit badge, 5 words a minute? So we built a buzzer, and we started practicing on that. We were over to another friend's house one time that was interested, and he had a ham operator from back east visiting. And he says, "Let me show you something on that." Now, we were struggling to copy 5 words a minute. He started sending in about 15, 20 words a minute, A, B, C, D, E. We recognized it. He said, "This is just another language. It's just a sound. Like if you say house or barn, it's different sounds. So the speed is not the thing that you have to learn it by sound. So that all 3 of us that were there, we had our ham licenses in about another 6 months. We got our code speed up to 10 or 12 words a minute, whatever it was. And so that's where I got my start in ham radio. About this Catlister thing, I was installing a network of radio photo stuff in South America for newspapers. And I was in this newspaper in Lima, Peru, waiting for my schedule to come up. We had a schedule out in New York at 2 p.m. And it was a blind transmission. We'd copy it, and the newspaper would print the pictures in the paper. Well, I was walking along the hallway, and I heard code coming from behind the door. So I listened a minute, and it was news out in New York. So I went inside, and here was the operator with his back to me, the headphones on. And on his workbench, a little table there, he had a crystal set, oatmeal box, Galena crystal, the whole works. Just like I built 1,000 years before. So when he got a rest break in a minute, I says, "You speak English?" "No, I don't English." So I said, "Momentito." So I went in my service kit, and I got a 1N34. I came in with my excellent Spanish. I says, "Malo, malo, malo. Bueno, bueno." So the next day, the bureau manager came to me and he says, "How much was that thing you gave the operator?" I says, "Oh, I guess 90 cents, something like that." "Oh," he said, "that's too big a part of his salary. He wanted to get one for his brother." So I got my ham license at age 17, ham license and the commercial telegraph second. And I held the telegraph second and telephone first until just 2 or 3 years ago I let him go because I never used them. So that's my story.
Well, we all have stories. here I am now living in this group on South El Molino with all these young kids. Across the street was my Italian friend, Nino Sinceri. Now, he wasn't able to go to college, so he joined the Navy, and they sent him to Chicago, and he went to the Naval Radio School there, and he was in the Navy for a while, and then he learned, while he was in the Navy, he went and learned about the weather reports. So finally, he ended up in the U.S. Weather Bureau, and he was the operator at MPG to send out for years the weather reports and so on and so forth. So I got him started. Now Clarence C. was the one that bought my 70 cents outfit. Now he's upgrading. Now we're all upgrading, and the war is going to come on. So here we have spark plugs and so on and so forth. That's the way we're learning the code, just like we did.
We're talking about the First World War.
The First World War. Back to young guys. Well, anyhow, so we put up a telegraph line. Now, you see, we all had to get off the air. We didn't have licenses. We're all bootleggers with spark plugs. So we had a telegraph line over half a mile long. There were 8 of us out. Now in Pasadena, it was a very strange thing. We had the Edison Company, but the Edison Company was charging too much. So the city of Pasadena decided to have a bond issue, so we had the municipal light department. So half of us on the telegraph line had Edison, half had the city of Pasadena, the municipal lights. Now our telegraph line was just a single line and to ground. And we did it. We took the 110 volts, and then we took electric light bulbs and put them in series to reduce the voltage to run our buzzers. But the trouble was, when Nino was on Edison, and Franklin Hahn was on Edison, I was on City Light, Seaman was on City, when we both shot that in, those bulbs not only became red hot, they became white hot. And one day the people from the power companies came down and said, "What's happening down here on South El Molino? All these surges, what's happening?" And he said, "Do you guys know that you're getting over 440 volts when you push those things together? And you guys can kill yourselves." Well, we're still alive. That's how we learned the code. Now, this is all while the war was going on. Now, the minute the war is over, you know, a strange thing, the Navy didn't want hams to come back on for some reason or other. So there was a whole year from the time in 1918 when the war ended before it came out that we were going to have our licenses. So, well, all these fellas, you think you're going to keep them off of there? I should say not. So I signed RS, Vance Phillips that used to live out here in the Hope Ranch, he signed NY, and Clarence signed CS, and all. So we were all on the air. I had a half-kilowatt transformer, Packard, but Vance and Seymour Johnston and Clarence, they had, the Thorderson, beautiful 1 kilowatt sets, Benwood gaps. I had to make my own gap, but Darrell had a wonderful article last month about building in the key clicks. And there's nothing like building your own. And on Saturday afternoons, it may be raining, we congregate at somebody's house and we wind the coils on them, oatmeal boxes. We do all these things. It was a fabulous, fabulous experience. Well, so the time comes when Colonel Dillon was going to come down from San Francisco. This was under the Department of Commerce. There was no FCC at that time. And he came to Los Angeles to the old YMCA building on South Hope Street. And that's where there had been a wireless school. And so that's where we all congregated to take our license. Well, about 150 of us, I guess, from all over Southern California. At that time, we had the red streetcar lines, the Pacific Electric. So they came in from San Bernardino, from San Fernando Valley, from Long Beach, from Pasadena. And we all congregated there. So we're now meeting for the first time. We're all 100 bootleggers. So we're getting acquainted. You know, so you're CS, so you're NY. Well, now we go in, they took us in on shifts to take our our code. But when it came to the written part, they had enough tables, so about 100 of us, 150 were in there. I told you this story once before about Vance. So we're in there taking our examination, all righty. Then all of a sudden, Colonel Dillon stands up and said, "By the way, is the NY station from Pasadena here?" And Vance, instead of keeping quiet, he stands up and he says, puts me at either. "Well, now, if you've heard some wonderful swear words that come from an army man that is experienced, I have never heard anything like it, and none of them had." He bawled Vance out. He said, "I have a good notion not to give you a license because what business have you got talking to NPL, NPG, all the Navy stations, NPX?" And he says, "What business have you got doing that?" Vance is smiling, you know. He finally sits down, he gets his license, 6GH. So that's how we all got it, all in one day. I don't think anybody failed. Everybody got their license that day. But that's the way it was done. And it was wonderful. Well, one other thing, I'll tell you. Now, there was a tree, 85-foot tree, on the next road, on the next street. Today, if you see a tree, you want to put an antenna on and it belongs to your neighbor, you don't go asking, you don't do anything like that anymore. We went and asked, "Sure, put up your wire." So I had a receiving antenna about 300 feet long, and Clarence, the one I had sold this set to, for 70 cents, now he's got the 1 kilowatt, and he puts up an antenna right up on the same tree that I've got my receiving antenna. Now, if you guys wonder what it sounds like when a 1 kilowatt, 10 feet away from your receiving antenna, starts up. Brother, the sparks flew. It was bedlam. But I got even with it one day too. So one day I decided I'd transmit on my receiving antenna. And he was doing some DX. Now in those days, from Pasadena to San Francisco was DX. If you worked Portland, boy, that was wonderful. And if you worked Seattle, once. That was terrific. Well, my furthest DX, as I told you, was 5G in Roswell, New Mexico. That was about 800 miles. Well, Clarence, I made a Christian out of it, so he put up another antenna for transmitting. But those are the things that happened in the early days, and it was really terrific. So tell some of your experiences.
I never had any back there. I was 2 years old.
I can't help it.
I couldn't run a
You were
bug.
that young,
I
boy?
couldn't run a bug.
How about you, Merle?
I was never that young.
You were born?
No,
Come on.
1912.
All my stuff started in the 30s. When I went to high school, they had a radio club at San Mateo High School. I graduated in 1932, I guess. Yeah. Oh, that's right. 17, 18. But we had a radio class there, and the I can't remember the teacher's name, but he showed us how to build a regenerative receiver, and also a super regenerator. And nobody even knew what 5 meters was in that. That was 56 to 60, and that was taken away from us, from television. And nobody even thought you could receive it or send a signal on those days. But he showed us how we could do it with a super regenerative receiver. And they called it was a transmitter receiver together. Remember those things? And so I bootlegged those for a while, and there must have been 2 dozen of us in the San Mateo County, from San Mateo to San Bruno, that were doing those things. I mean, nobody cared. It's like CB today. And,
That's right.
And well, now we got 6 meters, and I work a lot of DX and whatnot on it. But I worked San Jose. Some guy climbed all the way up to the top of Mount Hamilton. the last 500 feet is straight up. You can get up there with your car, and this guy was up at the top of Mount Hamilton, which is about, I think, 3,500 feet or something like that. I'm not sure what it is. And he said, "I'm cold." He said, "Well, why the hell don't you get to get in your car?" "No," he says, "I got a whole bunch more guys I've got to work." And he just went like it too. So if you imagine these guys' hands will do anything.
Sure. How about you, Merle? Well, you were pure? You weren't a bootleg driver?
Well, yeah, I was near P, and I was talking to, on 160 meters, using, yeah, this was about 1927. We were using our initials, and we never did make contact. And for 201As and push pull and a rig and a regenerated receiver, never made it. I had a lot of fun at MSS during the war, World War II, that is. I had a skipper that everybody was scared to death. They see him coming and they ducked someplace. Because he always had some complaint about what they were doing and how they were doing it. And he was giving me a working over one time, telling me I should appreciate the $2 an hour I was making, which was at that time, I think, $28 a month, $2 an hour. I said, Captain, I can't understand this $2 an hour business. And nobody ever talked back to him, I guess. And he looked surprised for a minute. Well, Parten, I'll tell you. Well, you've got a tennis court here, and you've got fishing right out there, boats. He starts telling me all the things we had. And it was funny, after that experience, Parten could do no wrong. I'd been ordering stuff for the radio parts for the station, and if I wanted 25 resistors, I'd order 50, and he'd cut it down to 10. So after this happened, if I wanted 25 resistors, I'd order 50, and he'd up it to 100. All of this heard me the title of brown nose and this and that. Yeah.
They actually was little 5 liters. That's where the first transceivers was. Remember the supergenerative transceivers?
Well, we had these variometers, you remember?
Oh.
So you sit there tuning like this.
I was just getting old enough to see that.
Yeah. And the first vacuum tube I had was called the Audiotron, a double filament, little tubes, it should come on the front, and that was my first vacuum tube. And, well, at high school, at noon, we all carried our lunch in those days. As soon as the bell rang, everybody, all the hams, about 15 of us, would run out to where the bleachers were, and under the bleachers out at the Horrell Field at the back of the Pasadena High School, that's where we had a meeting. Every day we had a radio meeting. Well, anyhow, we had a radio club, and sometimes we would meet up at Seymour Johnston's father's home up in Altadena. You know Seymour Johnston, he's the one that had this little railroad out here, and 60E was his car. And he came to school in an automobile. Well, you know, my grandfather didn't invent anything. His grandfather invented the thermostat, but mine didn't. So we had our radio meeting up there at his house, and under this big mansion that they had was like a room half his size. And then after the radio meeting was over, his father had a 35 millimeter regular movie projector, the kind that they have in the movie house. And he'd always have 1 or 2 comedies to show us after our six. So Seymour had a wonderful father, and we sure enjoyed it. And we had a lot of fun in those days. Then there was a fellow called Oliver Wright. I got him started, as I said, and with a little EI tuner. And finally, he became head of the Lakehurst, the transatlantic telephone for RCAO, for the telephone company. Well, one day on a Armistice Day down at Termit Park, this is before the Rose Bowl was built. Oh, say, by the way, the Rose Bowl, every time I get there, I start to shake because down under the Rose Bowl was a city dump. And that is where the telephone company dumped all their goodies. Receivers, magnets, telephone wire. And so that's where we went to get the wire to wire our loose couplers. You know? These magnets had this beautiful green silk wire, you know, terrific. You know, we got all this stuff free. It was wonderful. We didn't have any money in those days. And I don't have it now even. Oh, I was telling you about Armistice Day. Out of Truman Park, they were having between the Army and the Navy, not Annapolis and West Point. This was San Diego and Point for San Pedro. And it brought up, the Navy had brought up a little portable spark set. Now Oliver happened to be there, and of course he gravitated over to it, and they were sending the score down to San Pedro, and San Pedro MPX was sending out to NQW, which was a call for the New Mexico, which was the flagship where the Admiral was. I think it was Admiral Rodman, I've forgotten his name anyhow. So the darn thing breaks down. And I heard this squeak, 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 a straight gap, you know. About 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon, Oliver comes up, his face is red as a beet. He comes up on his bicycle, he says, Aram, you got to get on the air. We got to get the final score to the Navy. I said, what do you mean? He says, come on. So, you see, you have an oscillation transformer. We took that out. I took from my rotary spark gap one end to ground and one to this 300-foot receiving antenna that I had. Now that became my transmitter, right on Clarence's street. So I called NPX. Comes right back to me. So because I'm up now on 300-400 meters, I don't know where I am. And he comes back to me, and I said, I've got the final score. Navy 122, Army nothing. So he's transmitting. He's going to give it to the Admiral, not on the flagship. And I was so proud of myself that day, fellas. He says, final score, and he gave it via amateur station W6. No, there was no W, just 6JY, and he gave it to NQW. So boy, I saved the Navy that day, and I felt so good. I bet you had experience like that too.
No, I never.
Another time, I was down in, you know, in those days, if you saw a wire, there was no radio in those days. It was called wireless. You stopped to get acquainted with the guy. So on the way down to Ocean Park, on West Adams, or not West Adams, one of those streets that go down to the house there, I saw an antenna. I stopped there one day, and I got acquainted with this fellow. And he had a nice spark set. And then one evening, we were staying at the beach. I took the bus and went up to be with my friend Harold. Gross was his name. So we were listening, and all of a sudden, NPX comes on, and they knew that we were on there, and they said, there's an SOS, will you get in touch with that station? W6KH was his call. He's bothering us, we can't hear. So I called 6KH, he wouldn't listen to it, he just kept going on there, and he lost his license. Well, many years later, 20 years later, 20-some years later, in Pasadena, there was a fellow by the name of Johnny Rockrock. He was my friend, and I was in his place, and there was a fellow there, he said, he was 6KH. I said, by the way, I said, do you remember about 20 years ago or 25 years ago that NPX wanted you to get off the air? He said, yeah, I lost my license. I said, I know, I tried to help you get off, but it didn't work. So that's the way we would become. All kind of crazy things happened in those days, but that's the way ham radio was.
It hasn't changed much. If it is on those guys on the phone, you wouldn't think it changed at all.
I hear you on the phone once in a while, too. And you pen the needle?
No, I'm doing
And
it.
what do you think he does?
I'm
When I'm listening on the phone and he's on CW, bum, bum, bum.
We're 300 or 400
1,000 feet away. What?
You're 300 or 400 feet apart.
Well, I know, I can't help it. But
Well, how come you phone don't bother us, but Merle and I don't bother one another?
Because you're too far apart. Isn't that right, Phil? You're far apart, yeah. Well, anyhow, a lot of things happen.
I guess I've just kind of run out of stuff.
I got one that I'd like to say to the captive audience. I lost my dad and mother 20, 30 years ago. And there are things about the family that I would like to ask Mom. Nobody can answer it. So I urge all of you people to either tape record or write it down or do a diary or something and get those family records down so that you can pass it on to the ones later.
A question for you.
Yes.
Somewhere along the line, there were 5 of you guys who got together and started a vacuum tube.
You mean Penn Labs? These guys.
Could you tell us a little about that?
Say, by the way, let me tell
He
you
was the
something.
president of the company.
You don't know it, but I got 2 tubes free from you guys. No. I had my stockbroker. I didn't have my stocks.
Aram wanted some
In
stock.
Pasadena. And so he said, say, there's a company up there in Santa Barbara, you're a ham, they're manufacturing radio tubes, and I think they're going to do well. So he sold me some stock in Penn Labs. And his partner was a director of their company. So, by the name of Keith Nussbaum, you
That's
remember
right, I
him?
remember Steve.
So I was in the office once, and I said, Keith, when you go up to your director's meeting, any chance of getting me a couple of 4-250As? And I said, I'll see what I can do. So a few weeks later, he came back and said, I've got 2 nice, brand new 4-250As. Penn Labs. Didn't cost me a darn cent. So you guys really lost money on me.
Well, to make a long story short,
You made a lot of money, I know it. Go ahead.
I'm spending a lot too. Well, there was a group of us that were working at IMAC, myself, and the 3 other gentlemen. 2 of them were engineers, and 1 was an advertising man. And I was in charge of production at IMAC in San Bruno and Salt Lake City. But my Salt Lake City stuff was mostly by telephone or flying up there once in a while. But we suddenly decided, or the Navy decided, that they wanted a second source of supply for some of the penta, for the tetrodes, and triodes that IMAC was building, and also for some hydrogen thyrotrons that they were struggling back east trying to get it in supply. So one of the fellows, Bert Eves was his name, I can't remember his call, knew the Navy man that was interested in doing this, and he talked them into if we would go as a group down here any place and open up a tube plant, that they would give us a contract to make hydrogen thyrotrons. So Bert went around to all of us and told him what the proposition was. And of course, he wanted me there because I knew all about putting the stuff together. And he was a pretty good engineer, graduate of University of California, and a gentleman by the name of Lee Norton. He wasn't a graduate engineer, but he was pretty much a genius as far as radio was concerned. So we trooped out here to Santa Barbara, the 4 of us. The other man was an advertising salesman. And we started on that hydrogen thyrotrон project immediately. And they would give us progress payments, that's to keep us alive so we could eat. And we started to train some girls here in Santa Barbara on spot welding and putting filaments together and whatnot. And I had to teach everybody everything, from all the glass blowing to the spot welding to running the punch presses, the whole bloody works. So finally I got quite a few people trained, and we decided we were going to build some tetrodes. So we started building the 4125A, which was quite a popular tube at the time. The 4250A, the 4400, and then some triodes, HK54. All these tubes were wanted by the Army and Navy, and we had to get type approval on them first. They had to pass all the tests that the Army and the Navy required, and eventually we got all that, and then finally we started bidding on contracts. Being a small business compared to IMAC, and they were the only suppliers in the country that had type approval on the tetrodes. and some of the trials, the 250TH and 100TH and the like. But eventually we got type approval on all that, and then we were allowed to bid on contracts. And being small business, we could take a partial of the contract. If they wanted 5,000 twos, we could bid on 1,500, and we had to be within 10% of IMAX price. So I was in on the bidding at IMAX for years, so I knew every ticket they were going to bid. And it got to be pretty easy. Finally, we had to go up there and talk to them and say, "Now look, boys, at IMAX, we don't want any more than X amount of business. That's all we can handle, and we're going to stay in business regardless." So they agreed, "Okay, fine, you can have that much business. Nothing we can do about you now, you're established." So we stayed in business, I guess, and from 1952 we started until 1965, and we got an offer from the Raytheon company to buy us out. They wanted to get in the tube business, and they wanted to develop some new tubes of their own. So I was asked, Norton and I were asked, at that time Eves had gone, we're asked to write out a deal for them and tell them what we could do and how much money we could make and what our gross business would be and whatnot. And so we went ahead and did this. And this was in 1965. And our proposition was less than to develop what we wanted. It was less than $1 million. It was about, I think, $650,000. And they agreed that was fine. And so they gave us an offer on our company, and we accepted it. And then 3 years later, they still hadn't started on the program. And we were still going along building this old stuff that was beginning to fade out, and IMAX by that time had not invented, but had developed the zero bias trial, which is absolute revolution as far as some side is concerned. I'm sure you all know that. It replaces the tetras that need an extra power supply to run them, for the screens and all that. And they're very linear compared to our tetra. Tetra is a perfectly lousy tube. If you run it as a tetra, if you run it as a grounded grid, it runs fine. But building the grid in the zero bias triad is a very, very difficult job, and that's why I don't think many people are going to imitate IMAX successfully. I think they're going to have nothing but trouble with their tubes. As a matter of fact, there is an outfit out right now called Parten, which copied our name. We had nothing to do with them. They are building the 3Z500A, as they call it. And I hear they're having nothing but trouble with the tube. The tube is apparently made over in China, and is distributed by some company in Los Angeles. We have nothing to do with it. But anyhow, getting back to the other story, Raytheon suddenly decided that Parten was too small for them, that no, they wouldn't go ahead with the development work, and so they're just going to close the place down, fire everybody, and let us go. Of course, I had a contract with them, and I called that to their attention, and they said, "Well, we'll give you a job back in Springfield, Massachusetts." I said, "No, you owe me 2 years of pay, and it says right down here in the fine print that you never read that you can't move me more than 250 miles from Santa Barbara." So, okay, so I got a couple of years salary out of it. But what they did, they said, "Well, we'll sell you the whole thing back for $100,000. I said, no. I went all through this once, and we don't have enough working capital to take this place over, and no dice. They weren't going to leave any working capital there anyhow for us. We'd have to get bank loans or sell stock or something like that, and we didn't want to go through the pain. Besides, I thought I had enough money anyhow. By the time that we received the stock from from Raytheon in 1965 until they closed it down in '69. Their stock had tripled, actually tripled. And so I felt who the hell wants to go back to work, you know? So anyhow, we didn't do anything for about a year. Norton and I just bummed around and didn't do anything. He finally called me up one day and he says, hey, I keep getting bugged by a guy back in RCA and another guy in General Electric, and they say all the iMac tubes that they're buying are going flat on them. They can't keep their transmitters on the air, and what do we have to do to get back on the air? Make some tubes again. Oh, geez. By that time I was getting tired of not working. So I said, okay, let's give it a try. So we got Merle's friend, John Stewart, W6 GTI. He's another old guy who got his license in 1920.
That's too bad he couldn't be there tonight.
Yeah, he said he had guests at the house. And another young fellow, Mike, oh, forget it. Anyhow, we decided to go back into business again. And I guess we were in business for about, Mike was, right? We were in business for about 6 months, and we'd start making tubes. And we had produced, I guess, maybe 500 or 600 for RCA, because they gave us a nice contract. And we told them the tubes were going to cost them more because it's a startup deal, and we're doing this for you as a favor. And GE bought some from us, and also Westinghouse. And there was an outfit in Pasadena called Kilovac, and they wanted to get out of Pasadena. They wanted to come to Santa Barbara. So the president of the company called me up one day and he said, what's the chance of your company and our company getting together? And I said, I don't know, what's your proposition? He said, well, we'd like to move to Santa Barbara and merge with you guys and start up a plant. And I said, well, it sounds fine, come on up and talk. So he came up there and he wanted us to have 35% of the company, and he had 65%, or his company had 65%. So we sat down and added up all the figures, and it came out about right. So you know what Kilovac is today. I'm sure you people know who they are. They have a plant down in Carpinteria. And I think they're going to do $5 or $6 million worth of business this year. And they've been bought out now by another outfit. I mean, this is the way it goes in this industry. But we built tubes for about a year. And then the president of Kilovac decided that he was making more money from these vacuum relays, and the tubes were a load on his back, and he just cut it off. We had nothing we could say about it. So I went up and played golf. That was the end. But I still had some Kilovac stock. And I guess I got about 4 times my investment in vendor number 2 from Kilovac when I sold it.
Lucky guy.
And Raytheon sold Penman.
You tell them the story.
They assigned me, they sent a fellow from Salt Lake City to supervise destroying and keeping and whatever they wanted, and everything they didn't want, they wanted destroyed. And here was a pile of 0.5% meters we were taking sledgehammers to. It just break your heart. And all of that equipment they didn't want was destroyed and taken to the dump.
I forgot to tell you that Merle had worked for Parten for several years, 11 years, and he became a trader, went to work for iMac. Anyhow, they were so afraid that we might go back into business, iMac, that they came down with sledgehammers. And all this work that we had done for 15, 20 years now, they took the sledgehammers to, including all these beautiful meters and all kinds of glass work. And they had a lot of stuff that they wanted that we had made that they did, that they thought was pretty good. But the rest of the stuff, they banged it up and loaded it on the truck and didn't even dump it in the Santa Barbara dump. They took it to Redwood City or someplace because they didn't want us to look at it. And you can't believe the work that went into it. to what we did. Of course, they took the glass lathes that made by the Litton Company and took those because, I mean, those things are worth quite a bit of money. They're about, I guess we had 8 or 10 of them. They're worth about $3,000 a piece. And it costs a lot of money to get into the vacuum tube business. I remember over at Visalia one year, we have a DX convention and meeting over there every year. And the 3Z500 was actually the rage at the time. It was, I don't know if you guys realize what a popular tube that was, but there's thousands and thousands of them being sold throughout the whole world. I don't know, maybe, possibly 100,000 have been sold by now. And they weren't cheap, as you know. Anybody that has a rig with a 3Z500 and has to buy a new one knows. I think you can get one second-hand or cheap for around $100, $125. But I think the regular price on it is $156 now. Well, anyhow, this young fella came up to me and said, "Do you think you could build a 3Z500? Here I go again, another guy giving me the business." I said, "I think I could build anything if I had to." And he said, "Well, I'd like to get in," he says, "a group of us would like to get into the vacuum tube business." And I said, "I'd be happy to be an advisor for a certain amount of money, but I'm not going to sit down there and do any work, any supervisory work with your employees or anything like that." I said, "Come on up to Santa Barbara next week when I'm home and we'll talk it over." So he came up, he's a nice fellow, I can't even remember his call. He's from Pasadena or someplace down there. And so he said, "What will it take to get one done?" And I said, "What do you mean, what will it take? You want to build one tube? Or you want to build a half a dozen?" I said, "You try to build one tube, you're not going to build a one tube. You're not going to make it good. It's impossible." And I said, "It'd take you $50,000 worth of equipment just to build one tube." "Oh, I mean, it's impossible." He said, "No, it's impossible. That's what it'll take." And I said, "Not only that, maybe with $100,000 you might get your first tubes made." And he went away very discouraged. I don't know what he thought he could do it for. I don't know whether he was talking about 5,000, 10,000, or but 100,000 floored him. But he probably would have been wise to have done it. He would have got his one tube. I don't know whether he could have done after that. But at the time, there were employees available here in Santa Barbara that had been trained by Parten. And some of them were working for Kilovac. And very good supervisors. They could have got him over the hump. Now, whether he could have made $100,000 out of it or not, I don't know. But he could have gone on copying. The Russians are copying iMac now. And they're doing a pretty good job of it. But I don't believe they'll ever build a zero-bias trial. If they do, they've got some damn good engineers. Okay, that's it.
Well, I was just in the wrong business.
Yeah. Selling carpets?
Good show. Good show. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. We enjoyed it.
Oh, yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, this is years ago I've seen it.
That's the tubes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Probably, yeah, the event. Look at these tubes.
That's amazing.
Yeah, look at this. That is, oh yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, yesterday, this is my 6-meter AM.
I got a 5-meter AM like that.
So you see the better side of the solders.